Do you have any advice for people listening on just the concept of actualization and finding your gifts?
Absolutely.
Because you went from it seems like you were just a an athlete by process of your dad being hard on you and you just having physical gifts and growing in those gifts and being competitive. And then you have this realization after you knock somebody out that maybe the healing side is where you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
And you slowly start to take these steps. But how did you really start to actualize those gifts into what your career has become?
Well, I think a lot of it really came from working with the monks.
Hmm. When you were 15.
Well, I started when I was 12. My
Hmm.
mother joined the Self-Realization Fellowship, which is Paramahansa Yogananda's teachings, when I was 12. And it was interesting because my mother had been meditating for many, many years. And so my mom would talk to me about what I was experiencing in my meditation. And I used to tell her about the visions I would have and things like that. And she would be shocked because she goes like, Paul, I've been meditating for a long time and I'm not even at that level.
Hmm.
So it's almost as though as a child, now I know it's past life stuff that I'm carrying in, but I had the ability to focus my mind. And because I had to work through so much pain with my father, I learned how to kind of be in my body, but be above it as well.
Hmm.
And so I learned how to be um, objective about where that line was between disabling myself, but pushing myself hard enough to grow.
Hmm.
And it's hard for a lot of athletes to figure that out.
Right.
Um, but because my father was not a guy that ever told me that I did a good job, no matter how hard I tried, I really craved acknowledgement. And so I think a lot of what drove me was anytime I could be in an environment where I could win a trophy or get some kind of acknowledgement because I lacked that from my father so much. Um, I just went the extra mile
Hmm.
with everything that I did. I've always done that. And so what I realized early on is that if I really have a goal that I really want to achieve, that I have to make that the North Star on my compass and I have to push away anything that could contradict that.
Hmm.
And so a lot of my friends, for example, had problems with drinking and smoking a lot of pot and, um, you know, staying up late at night watching television, just kind of the stuff that young men get into,
Yeah.
being violent and getting in bar fights and just doing what I called stupid shit. But I didn't want anything to get in the way of me winning,
Hmm.
you know? And so I learned very early that if you really want to achieve something, then you really have to be disciplined about making sure you're focusing on it and putting your mind to it and not making excuses and do what you've got to do with your food, with your sleep, with your stretching, with whatever you've got to do to have the edge. You better do it, or you're
Hmm.
always going to be second, and nobody remembers who's second. And I
Hmm.
don't like being second. So I carried that discipline out of the military into my work, and I studied science of mind. Tony Robbins used to be my client for a number of years. I was his therapist, and I took tons of his workshops. And Tony's only 2 weeks older than me. We were really good friends. Um, I think the key thing is that you really have to decide what's important to you. I love the quote by Jerry Wesh: "If you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis."
Hmm.
And when I look around since I was young, I saw people that were constantly unhealthy, um, distracted, would set goals and not achieve them. They had become oriented such that the crisis was the normal state of life for them. And so for them to achieve something was a big step
Hmm.
because they didn't have the discipline. But for me, I lived in a very chaotic, crisis-like environment where there was a lot of violence and a lot of stress. And so the only way I could achieve safety in the environment was to work so hard that my father would leave me alone. And there was many times that I was exhausted, but I knew that if I didn't get the job done, that I would never get to go to, because my dad's rule was you don't go to sports practices until this work's done.
Hmm.
And he gave us a lot of work. So I had to focus like a laser beam. But at the end of the day, I realized most people are so comfortable living a mundane life that when it comes time to really focus, they don't have the discipline or the strength to do it.
Hmm.
But paradoxically, I came from an environment where if I didn't have the discipline and the strength to focus, I would either get beat up or I would lose. So athletically, I would lose, and then at home, I would get beat up. And I didn't like either. So and later I studied science of mind and learned that I had naturally developed exactly the abilities that you would learn if you were studying science of mind and you wanted to manifest, for example. So manifestation occurs in 3 stages. Thought first. First, you have to be clear in your mind of what you want. So you have to have clarity. 2, you have to believe in yourself. 3, you got to take action. This is why the Quakers say pray and move your feet.
Hmm.
Most people just pray.
Hmm.
Dear God, let me win the lottery.
Yeah.
Dear God, let me have a beautiful partner that'll make love to me all day long, but I'll continue to be the same asshole I've always been.
Totally.
You know? So you have to think clear. You have to put it to word. So I always wrote my goals down so that I could read them regularly, daily. And then you have to go do the things you got to do. And you got to be clear about what is in the way of you being that person. I would visualize myself winning. I visualized myself. The only way I could get onto the Army boxing team, by the way, because I was in the 82nd Airborne Division and the 82nd Combat Aviation Battalion, and aviators hardly ever exercise. And I hated that life, even though I spent a year in electronics school. It was like I put a lot of work into becoming an aviator because I didn't want to be on the front lines. I wanted to be away from the battlefield because the life expectancy of a foot soldier at that time was 16 seconds in a battlefield.
Oh my gosh.
So I got the highest technical training I could qualify for. And they keep Cobra helicopters miles from the front line because they're $11 million a piece. So I knew if I attached myself to expensive equipment, I was in the best place to be. So I created my own safety plan, and then I joined the 82nd Airborne Division because I knew if I didn't like electronics, I could fight my way onto the Army boxing team. So I came in with the plan, but to get to Fort Bragg, I had to be a paratrooper, which I didn't mind anyhow because I wanted to see if I could be one of those badasses. And so anyhow, to get onto the Army boxing team, they wouldn't give me time off. They wouldn't let me have time to train. I'm like, I'm going to fight some of the best boxers in the world, but they won't let me have any time off to train. So I had to get up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock every morning. I had to be in formation by 6. So I'm like up early as hell to train, to run. And then I'm like doing push-ups any chance I can, hanging off drainage pipes in the ceiling, doing chin-ups. I mean, it's doing sit-ups every chance I could while I'm working, right? And so they wouldn't let me book an appointment because they knew if I got on the boxing team, then they were going to lose me in the unit. And they don't want to spend, it cost them $350,000 to train me. They don't want to spend $350,000 to have a guy go join a boxing team.
Right.
So every year in the 82nd Airborne Division, they have what's called the general inspection. And once a year, you have to face the general, and it's a post-wide competition to identify who the best soldier is. And so they choose the 6 best soldiers out of 14,000 men. They choose 6 top soldiers. And it's very, very hard competition to win. But I I said, "I am gonna win this competition. I don't give a shit what it takes." And actually, I told some of the guys I worked with, and they laughed at me. They said, "You're an idiot. The guys that have been in the military for 20 years trying to win that competition. You're a private. You don't even, you're still wet behind the ears." I said, "I will win the competition." And so I put my mind to it, man. I memorized the entire soldier's manual. You know, long story, but they check everything, man. They go through your toolbox, your bed, your boots, your um chem gas mask, and your I forgot the name of it now. It's been so long, but I mean, it's a full on. Then you stand in ranks. They look at your body. They look at your hair. They look at your nails. They look at
Wow.
your clothing. They look at your boots. And then they pop quiz you on the soldier's manual, which is like 400 pages of technical information about every other military and your own equipment. Like they say, okay, you know, what's the muzzle velocity of an AK-47? You know, or that ask you questions about, you know, what kind of explosives are in a hand grenade, shit like that. So it's very intense. I mean, I really had to study hard.
Mm.
And so I won.
Mm.
I was one of the 6, and I got a 3-day pass paid to do whatever I want. So I phoned up the boxing gym and I said, "I want to try out." So they scheduled a fight, and I went down and I took out one of their welterweights. And I became a fighter on the boxing team.
Dang.
So the point I'm making is you got to
Yeah.
put your mind to shit, and you got to
Totally.
make it. You got to make it your life. You can't, you know. An example I give my patients is if you want to train for a marathon, if you hold the mindset that you're not a marathoner till you're running a marathon,
Yeah.
you're making a big mistake.
Totally.
You got to be the marathoner while you're training for the marathoner. So you have to eat, sleep, breathe, and shit marathon for the X number of months that you're going to train. Because if you wait till you're at the marathon to consider yourself a marathoner, you're never going to win anything.
Yeah. Good luck.
In fact, you might give up at halfway.
Yeah. Totally.